Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brandon Doyle. I am the marketing manager here at Blue Corona. And today we're here to talk about smart selling, or really a guide to customer service training. What best practices can your CSR reps implement in order to turn more calls into booked appointments? Before we go ahead and jump in, a couple administrative pieces to get out of the way. Number one, we want to thank the fine folks over at ACA, the Air Conditioning Contractors of America. This webinar is co-hosted with our counterparts over at ACA, and we thank you for helping sponsoring and supporting Blue Corona. For those of you in attendance, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day. I know it's the busy season. We're in the middle of summer now, so I appreciate you taking the time as well out of your day to sit in on this webinar. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to have three primary objectives, and of course we'll save questions for the end. So number one, we're going to talk about what is smart selling. Number two, we're going to go through the top reasons why CSRs fail to convert their calls into booked appointments. And then we're going to cover 5 proven CSR best practices that will help your team better themselves and improve their booking rates. If at any point, if you do have questions throughout today's webinar, I encourage you to click in your GoToWebinar panel, hit the little triangle next to the word questions, just to the left of questions, and you'll be able to type in your question at any point throughout the webinar. So again, at any point, if you do have a question, type it in there, and we'll be sure to answer as many questions as we can at the end. So first, a little bit of background about Blue Corona, who we are, how we got here today, and quite frankly, why you should listen to us. So Blue Corona is a full-service digital marketing agency made up of a team of 65-plus marketers across our 2 locations, one in Charlotte, North Carolina, and one outside of Washington, D.C. We are a full-service digital marketing agency. However, we like to think of ourselves as partners to all the businesses that we work with. And our primary goal is to help our clients increase leads and sales, optimize their marketing costs, and differentiate their company online from competitors. Founded in 2008, we really specialize in home service and more specifically HVAC marketing. We found that the heating and air conditioning industry is prime and ready to continue to capitalize on not only the changes that are happening in the digital marketing industry, but as well as the nature of organic search, paid search, and digital search as a whole. And we've really worked with HVAC contractors since we've really first opened our door nearly 11 years ago. We're celebrating our 11th year of business. And of course, again, we are ACA's exclusive digital marketing partner. And we're proud of that. We love to work with residential and commercial, but residential heating and air conditioning companies, just like many of you in attendance today. So to summarize all that, we help companies grow. And one of the areas for growth that we frequently see is customer service. You know, time after time again, clients would say to our account managers that they notice they're getting a lot of phone calls, they're getting a lot of leads, but a large percentage of them are not booking into appointments. And that was a big cause for concern of them, as you can imagine. And they wanted to know what was happening. Why couldn't their customer service representatives, or CSRs, which I'll use as an abbreviation throughout today's webinar, why couldn't their CSRs close more deals or set more appointments? And then they asked us for help. Now, in our time here at Blue Corona, one of our mantras is track, test, tweak, repeat. And when it comes to that, tracking is at the very fundamental, is a very fundamental part of what we do here. And a big part of that tracking is called phone call tracking, or dynamic phone call tracking. And what dynamic phone call tracking allows us to do is to better calculate return on investment from all of your digital marketing campaigns through the use of recorded phone calls, and then having a team of in-house call taggers that listens to every single one of our clients' phone calls and dispositions them. And those dispositions oftentimes fall under categories like new customer leads, existing customer leads. You know, maybe that person is a priority service member with you, or they signed up for a maintenance agreement. As well as weeding out all the spam or junk calls that you get as well, because we, of course, we or any digital marketing company wants to make sure that we don't take credit for those spam or marketing calls. And at the same time, we want to give credit where credit's due with existing customer leads and new customer leads. And over the course of our 10 plus years in business, we've listened to over 3.5 million inbound phone calls. That is a lot of phone calls, 3.5 million inbound calls in over a decade that our team has listened to. And what we found is that there are some pretty glaring missed opportunities in many of these calls where the customer service rep simply doesn't understand the customer's request. Maybe the CSR didn't answer the right questions, or quite frankly, they dropped the ball. And after that, with our clients coming to asking us for help, having all these calls at our disposal, we said we have to help our clients. And that's really where our Smart Selling program was born. Now, Smart Selling really focuses, again, on your customer service at the CSR level. Of course, your technicians, installers, or sales managers who may be meeting at the client's homes or at the homeowners' homes. That's another type of customer service, but we're really going to focus today on your customer service representatives, specifically, who's handling the calls coming into your office. And what we found is that in the sales funnel, which this probably looks very familiar to many of you on today's webinar, we like to start at the top. Marketers like to start at the top. We need to get you impressions, or said another way, we want to help you gain more visibility, because without visibility, no one knows you exist unless they've already worked with you. And then, of course, we want to funnel that buyer through the sales funnel, through your website, turn them into an inbound lead, turn them into an appointment, and ultimately help you generate more sales and revenue. And your CSR team becomes a leverage point really right here, right between inbound leads and setting those appointments. And with the right training, your team will become better equipped to handle those inbound leads and book more appointments, which ultimately leads to more sales and revenue for your company. Or said another way, improved customer experience is equivalent to gaining and retaining more customers. So why is customer service important when interacting? Well, when you think about it, your customer service reps are often the first line of defense. They're in the trenches. They're speaking with customers, whether or not they're familiar with you or not. And because improving the customer service experience means that you will gain and retain more clients, not only do you turn more calls into booked jobs, but you're turning those customers, whether they be repeat or first-time customers, you will eventually become their go-to company when a customer has a need, versus the customer going back to, let's say, Google the next time they need it to book an appointment and heading over to one of your competitors. We want them to call you back. And that's where your CSR team can be a really great asset to your company. And I talked about wanting to turn those customers into repeat customers for you. We want to upsell them into maintenance agreements or priority service agreements. And that's simply because, on average, loyal customers are worth up to 10 times as much over the course of their lifetime as compared to their first purchase. They're worth 10 times more if you can turn them into a second, a third, a fourth, etc. transaction than if they were to purchase from you just a single time. And when you make a customer feel valued and build a connection with them, they're more likely to call you back, again, whenever they need, whether it's the same service or a new type of service that you may offer. So when we think about those 3.5 million inbound phone calls that our team has listened to, dispositioned, and analyzed, there's another important aspect that comes into play specifically for HVAC contractors, and that is what we've seen here at Blue Corona based on our own analysis, is that service-based companies, or HVAC companies like you all are 3 to 9 times are likely to receive 3 to 9 times more phone calls than they will web form inquiries. In a very need-based industry like HVAC, your customers want to get on the phone with someone. They want to schedule a call so that someone could be at their house to help troubleshoot, diagnose, and walk them through next steps. And we've used these insights, situations, and challenges from these calls to create a customer service training program. And we're going to walk through, what are those best practices. But first, through the same 3.5 million phone calls, we've also learned why calls do not book into an appointment in the first place. So let's take a look at some of those reasons. So number one, the CSR doesn't understand the customer's request. When you think about that, sometimes this is the result of the customer's own confusion. Maybe they think that it's an air conditioner issue or something wrong with their unit, and turns out it's actually a thermostat issue that they didn't even know about. So, maybe the CSR doesn't understand the customer's request and therefore struggles to build value or provide insight into why your company is the best choice for those works. Sometimes your CSRs just simply won't answer or don't answer the right questions or the questions that the customers are asking. Quite frankly, some CSRs, we all have bad days, but some CSRs can be rude or combative. And of course, that's nothing we ever want to hear or experience, not only as a customer, but as a business owner. You never want to hear of your CSRs being rude or combative, turning that pleasurable experience, customer service experience, into something negative. Oftentimes, CSRs will simply record the incorrect customer information. They're writing down the wrong customer phone number. They're writing down or have a typo in the client's email address when entering them into the CRM, in which case, again, poses another problem for any sort of follow-up and getting back in touch with that client. Sometimes CSRs are not knowledgeable about the products and services that your company is offering. And this is one of the bigger challenges that we often see in our Smart Selling program, is that CSRs are unable or simply not confident enough to answer the homeowner's questions about a product or about a service or about your company simply because they don't have that knowledge or were never given that knowledge or properly trained. CSRs focus heavily on price. Again, we'll talk about this later in the webinar, but you want to make sure you're always building value for the customer and not focusing on price, because if you can produce value and effectively communicate that value, price will be secondary to the homeowner because they trust you and know that you're the authority when it comes to HVAC. Sometimes CSRs do not properly manage the homeowner's objections when on a phone call. And we'll talk about objections here coming up, but sometimes, for example, there might be a more economic buyer who just isn't quite sold on your company. Or maybe they respond with so-and-so says, or another company says, and then has a false statement. You want to make sure you're handling those CSR objections in a tactful, meaningful way in order to effectively communicate and continue to build value. Of course, sometimes the CSRs, being on that front line of defense, are the person communicating this, but sometimes your company or the CSR simply cannot satisfy the customer's timeline. It's the middle of June, towards the end of June now. We're in the full swing of cooling season, and if you quite simply just can't get to that customer's house for 2 or 3 weeks, that might be something that might be reflected in the call with the CSR. However, not necessarily 100% their fault. Sometimes the CSRs are letting the customer dictate the call too much and not managing expectations well enough. Or quite simply, sometimes CSRs, they rely on, well, let me call you back, or we'll call you back. And then what happens? Oftentimes, that customer does not receive a call back. So we now understand why calls aren't booked at a high level. Of course, all of your customer service representatives are going to have their own style, their own selling style. They have their own personality. Your CSR reps are real people. So even though they might have a common goal, that doesn't necessarily mean that that their top reason for why their own calls aren't booked are that those may be different than why Susie's or John's and other CSRs in your company are not booking phone calls. So let's next move into the best practices, really why you're here. And we're going to take a look at 5 proven CSR best practices. And those are, number 1, you want your CSRs to be confident. And we're going to go into more details, but confidence is key when speaking with homeowners and trying to turn them from web searcher or phone call into a booked appointment. You want your CSRs to be knowledgeable, again, about your products, your services, your company, and as well as about some of your competitors if they are able to gain that knowledge. You want to make sure that you are building value with the person on the phone, building value with that homeowner, and properly communicating why your company is the best solution to resolve their need. Again, you want to make sure your CSRs are managing objections tactfully and concisely. And lastly, you want to be grateful. You want that customer to have a pleasant experience when working with your company. So number one, be confident. So when it comes to being confident, there's a variety of ways your CSRs can build their own confidence. Number one is to make sure that you are training and teaching your CSRs about your services. Now, I don't want you to think that that means you automatically have to get them NATE certified if all your technicians are NATE certified. That's not the case here. But you do want your CSRs to be knowledgeable about what you do offer and what you don't offer. For example, if you're a Carrier factory authorized dealer, why is Carrier the superior manufacturer of air conditioners or furnaces? Why should they choose a Carrier factory authorized dealer? Or another example, do you offer geothermal services? I've overheard many phone calls where the CSR rep is confused about what geothermal is as it relates to geothermal versus maybe an air source heat pump. And therefore, they don't sound confident in their response, and the customer can sense that. Just like you teach your CSRs about your services, you want to make sure you're teaching them about your products as well. Again, this doesn't mean that they have to sit through the factory training or know the ins and outs or know how to clean air conditioner coils properly or exchange out that blower motor, but you want your CSRs to be knowledgeable about the products you offer. And that includes everything from the brands or the manufacturers that you work with and install. Again, maybe you're a Carrier factory authorized dealer or a Rheem dealer or so on. But you also want your CSRs to be knowledgeable about your products that you've created, like a maintenance agreement. What is included in those maintenance agreements? Is it a 6-month contract? Can you cancel at any time? Having all of that knowledge and tools to provide those answers when necessary are going to go a long ways in not only building confidence with the homeowner, but also within the CSR, him or herself. When you start to get in the flow of these calls and you're providing great customer service, you're knowledgeable and you're confident in your answers, that boosts team morale and that CSR's own confidence in themselves. You should always be providing scenario-based customer service training, or said another way, or known as role playing. And there's a reason why role play is still one of the most effective ways to train a customer service rep. So when you start to think about your scenario-based customer service training or role playing to help train your CSRs, we recommend a couple things. Number one, you want to make sure that you play the part of the homeowner. If you're in attendance in today's webinar, chances are you're either an owner of an HVAC company or someone that's in a position of management experience and authority to be able to hold these training sessions. So you're probably more familiar with the industry or the products and services yourself than maybe your CSR reps are. And we recommend starting with easy scenarios like my air conditioner broke down. Okay, and then as the CSR gains confidence, you want to make your way up to more difficult calls from the homeowner. And you yourself should be asking those difficult questions and making those objections yourself in order to help your CSR and assist them in communicating and managing expectations and providing thorough but concise answers. You want to make sure that when building confidence with your CSR team, you want to make sure you're acknowledging mistakes openly, but build upon them. Every mistake is a teaching moment, and mistakes happen. We recognize, and there's no shot that all of your CSRs or even one of your CSRs is booking 100% of their phone calls when they're getting 20, 30, 40, 50, or sometimes hundreds of phone calls that they're fielding in a month. Not all of those are you going to be able to service, and not all of those are going to decide to go with your company, and that's okay. But when mistakes are made, maybe a call was handled poorly, sit down with the CSR rep, listen to the call with them, ask questions like, what could you have said here? And if they don't know or they don't know the proper answer to that response, work with them as how you would respond. what would you do to respond and provide value to that customer or answer that specific question about a product or service that you have? And on the flip side of that, you should not only be acknowledging mistakes openly, but you want to make sure that you are recognizing great CSRs or great moments that have happened to help build confidence with your team. So when you think about that, if a call is handled really well, some simple praise or gratitude goes a long way in building team morale. And that can come in the forms of things like verbal praise in front of their peers or in front of the whole team for a well-handled call. For example, let's say an angry homeowner was then turned into, or an angry customer, was then upsold and turned into a maintenance agreement customer. I've actually heard calls where that happens, where the CSR is able to listen, acknowledge the problem, express empathy, and connect with that customer, and then work to build value and ultimately have even upsold them in that process. So simple praise and gratitude, a cup of coffee, a $5 gift card, anything that just is something small to recognize the wins while you're at the same time recognizing and building upon the losses or the mistakes. Number two, again, you want to make sure that your CSRs are knowledgeable, and you want them to be knowledgeable in their job. And these are a few of the things that we commonly see many CSRs struggle with when it comes to answering questions for the person on the line. So again, the services that you offer, products, services, the service areas that you work in, knowing where your territory starts and ends. Let's say you'll travel within a 25-mile radius of your warehouse location or from your office. Your CSRs need to know that, and they need to know when someone falls inside and outside of their service area to best handle that call appropriately. Again, maintenance agreements or priority service agreements, what is included, what's not included, what does that pricing look like, any fees associated with some stuff, any discounts that are included in that maintenance agreement, or any perks for that agreement. You want your CSRs to be well-versed and know the ins and outs of those so they can effectively identify the pain points the customer is having and then provide a solution in building value with them. Some other common questions that CSRs typically struggle with that you, again, want to make sure your CSRs knows through the use of either a training manual, pop quizzes, if you will, or even in discussions with them are things like business hours. I've actually heard phone calls where the CSR rep has to go to Google's while on the phone with a customer, Google's their own business hours because they didn't know. And what might even be worse than that from a customer service experience is the pricing and fees. Almost all homeowners are somewhat price conscious when speaking with one or a couple HVAC companies for their needs, assuming it's not a dire need. If they have some flexibility on timing, they're probably going to be price shopping. So you want to make sure your customers know exactly what your pricing model is. Do you require a service fee just to go diagnose the problem, like a $79 service call fee? Are those free? Do you give free second opinions if they've already received an estimate from one of your competitors? Knowing those and having those handy for your CSRs, again, is going to go a long way in towards building confidence and providing accurate information to the homeowners. Schedule and timing. This one can be a little delicate. For example, one of the companies that is enrolled in our Smart Selling program, one particular sales rep does not like to share his schedule with his CSRs. And that presents some challenges when trying to book an appointment for someone if you can't pull up your sales rep's schedule. So knowing when you can get out to their house or send a technician out to their home to troubleshoot or perform the service that's requested is going to be super important. Your CSR should always be kept up to speed on whatever coupons, promotions, or discounts that you are running, and kind of likewise the rebates and tax incentives that may be associated with certain products or manufacturers. If someone is looking to install a ductless system, is there any sort of manufacturer rebate or government tax rebate as well that might be of value to that customer? And lastly, you want to make sure that your CSRs are well-versed about your company history, how you started. You'd be surprised the amount of phone calls that we listen to where people just ask about the company, how long they've been in business, where their office is located, and so on. And your CSRs should be well-versed in that as well. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. Oftentimes, we see our clients create a training manual. Maybe you already have one of these manuals, and the CSRs commit that information to memory. But the ongoing training is going to be super important in keeping them up to speed on the latest and greatest for your company. Another great way I've seen some of our larger clients is they actually send some of their CSR reps out on calls for a morning or an afternoon with a technician. Again, to more observe and see how things are handled as opposed to the nitty-gritty details of how to fix a unit. But I have seen clients do that, and it's been well received by the CSRs as well. Next, how do you build value to the customer? Particularly when maybe you don't quite stack up to a larger competitor who might have additional resources or more technicians or more vans when it comes to scheduling. So number one, you should always be listening, or your CSR rep should always listen to the customer. Maybe you've experienced this before. Have you ever called a business with a problem or maybe a complaint, and the representative you speak to is obviously distracted or uninterested in the issue? Or maybe they make an assumption about what they think the problem actually is without actually listening to the details, where after listening to those details, maybe it becomes apparent that the issue isn't actually problem A, it's problem B. And just think about how frustrating that is in your own experience. A customer's already upset, and then a customer service representative who's inattentive only adds insult to injury. And if you and your CSRs simply listen to your customers, you're more likely to be able to effectively help them. You want your CSRs to be asking open-ended questions. So most CSRs undervalue the importance of open-ended questions or will ask yes/no questions. Now, when given a yes/no option, oftentimes customers will simply reply with that: yes, no, okay. And those aren't very helpful when trying to listen and get all the details of what that your CSRs need to collect on the call. So asking open-ended questions like what's going on or what problem are you experiencing? Those are great ways to open up the dialogue. And when you do open up that discussion, or you do ask those open-ended questions, again, take a step back, be quiet, and listen to the customer so that you can make sure you are providing the best information you can that specifically addresses that need that they have on that particular day and time. Oftentimes, you'll also see that some customers start describing the problem in more detail, or even what they try to do to self-fix the situation, which may also be important for your CSRs to record that information and pass along the technician. You want your CSR reps to be the subject matter experts. And again, while your CSRs won't have the same industry knowledge or product knowledge that a technician will have, they should be more knowledgeable than the average homeowner. And demonstrating a sound knowledge of your company's products and services will position the CSR to be a valuable resource, not only within that call, but on any future calls. People oftentimes, they remember the unpleasant experiences they have with companies. Maybe they didn't accept a return if they're returning a pair of running shoes, for example, or were misled throughout their journey. But when it comes to local heating and air conditioning companies, demonstrating a sound knowledge of your company's products and services will help establish and resonate with that customer when they call back. Oh, my name is John Doe, and I spoke with Brandon from Blue Corona earlier. He was telling me this. And maybe they have some follow-up questions, and that's only going to again, build more value. Of course, you want to propose some solutions for the customer. No customer wants to be left hanging or out in the dark and not really know what the next steps are. And oftentimes, as is the nature of the business, for all of you in attendance, the proposed solution is probably going to be to schedule a service call or to schedule an estimate, right? But even if it's not that, if you're not booking an appointment, maybe this person lives 2 hours away and somehow came across your company, and you simply can't, they're outside your service area. Make sure that your CSR reps are letting that customer know where your service area is and why they cannot, unfortunately, send a technician out to their home. being honest and transparent and upfront is going to also help build that value, even when the proposed solution might not be something that the homeowner wants to hear. And lastly, always follow through. While this seems like a no-brainer, following through, or put another way, doing what you say you're going to do, builds a lot of trust and confidence with customers. And that can be everything from calling the customer back when you say you will, to making sure email responses are followed up on in a timely manner, invoices are delivered in a timely manner, all of those things that go into the entire customer experience from initial phone call with your company through when that invoice is paid, are going to build a positive experience. And quite simply, if a CSR rep drops the ball, maybe they don't have the answers to a question they were supposed to be following up with someone at the office on, that breaks that trust, and those homeowners are less likely to work with you in the future, or they remember that unpleasant experience, which may impact their decision when deciding who to contact the next time they need a new furnace installed, or if it's summertime, when they need that air conditioner repaired. Managing objections. This is one of the more difficult pieces of customer service training. No matter how great your CSR reps are, there's always going to be objections from the homeowner that's on the line with them. And so some of those objections can everything from price objections, right? Maybe I already got an estimate and this person said they could do the same work for a third of the price. Knowing how to handle that and, again, build value. Maybe the objection is something with the timing aspect, or maybe there's a miscommunication somewhere along the line. But when managing objections, you want to first and foremost let the customer feel heard, and you want to be empathetic to them. So saying things like, performing actions that spend time understanding the homeowner's needs as well as understanding what value drivers they have, or AKA what they want, is going to help avoid and give your CSRs the tools to handle those sticky situations. Empathy and authenticity are two great tactics to make a homeowner feel heard. Brandon, I'm really sorry that you're experiencing that. I had something happen at my house just last summer. Sounds like it's the same problem. I'd be happy to help you out. Here's what we can do. We can have a technician at your home at this date, this time, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so really making sure they feel heard and that you truly understand. And you should be repeating that frustration back to them, or repeating that problem back to them. Thank you, Brandon. I understand that you're having a problem. Your air conditioner won't turn on. You've tried diagnosing the issues through the thermostat and blah, 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 blah. Repeating and making sure that they feel heard, and then, of course, being honest, empathetic, and relating to them builds a connection and trust. You want to make sure your CSRs are asking and not telling. Remember, your CSRs are sales reps. They're trying to set appointments to help you grow the bottom line. So don't minimize, or your CSR reps should not minimize the objections that the customer is voicing to them, and they shouldn't object or try to convince the customer that your solution is best. And when I say that, I mean they shouldn't be saying things like, well, we are a better company. We have more reviews than John Smith Heating and Air down the street. Instead, your CSR should be asking as many questions in order to understand the concern, and then answering tactfully depending on the customer's responses. So the demeanor, the CSR's demeanor should be calm, really upbeat and really inquisitive when it comes to asking those questions, to show that you are engaged with the homeowner, you're engaged in the conversation and truly hearing what they have to say. Another great way to manage objections is quite simply to explain how your solution has helped others in a similar situation. So you want to make sure you are doing everything in your power to connect with that customer. And one of the great ways to do that is the birds of a feather approach, where let's say you just spoke with a customer earlier this morning who had the same exact issue as this person. Tell them how the technician was able to get out there first thing this morning and troubleshoot the issue, and that person has already gone and their unit has been fixed. So explaining how your solutions have helped others or others like the customer also goes a long way. It's kind of your version of the word of mouth, or we did great work for so-and-so, and here's how it's going to help you. Any responses to an objection from the customer, all your responses should be clear and concise that the CSRs are giving. Oftentimes, a long response where the CSR rambles on and kind of runs circles around the question isn't likely to be well received. And from our 3.5 million phone calls that we listen to, they're not well received. And not to mention the homeowner loses not only interest through a long-winded answer, the homeowner also may become distracted. Let's say Billy and Susan have their kids running around and Susan's on the phone and her husband Billy is trying to corral them in the background and keep them quiet. There's a whole list of things that we could go on and on of why your customers may be distracted. But let's face it, those happen. So you want to make sure your answers are clear and concise and keep the conversation moving along. And lastly, you want to practice with your CSRs. One of the best ways to properly manage objections is, again, to use that role play or the situation-based customer service training. You want to make sure that, as a person in power at your company, that you are doing everything you can to give your CSRs the tools and the knowledge they need in order to manage those objections. And your CSRs should be doing their best to commit them to memory. Repeat the same situation a couple times because the CSR's talk track may be slightly different each time, but with the same goal. Make sure that you're practicing those objection responses. Your CSRs are committing them to memory. You don't have to recite them word for word, but having a strong foundation gives your CSRs the confidence they need to deliver compelling responses every single time a customer objects. And lastly, be grateful. So when it comes to being grateful, there's a lot of ways you can do this. Our general golden rule of thumb here at Blue Corona is be a decent human being, be polite, and use your manners that our moms and dads instilled in us. So saying things like thank you. Saying thank you just goes a long way. Thank you for being a customer of Blue Corona. We really appreciate it, and we'll speak to you soon. Or whatever your sign off is with those customers, make sure to say thank you, particularly if they scheduled a service call. Now, if someone didn't book the call, saying thank you still goes a long way. Thank you for calling Blue Corona. I'm sorry we weren't able to help you today, but please consider us in the future. Or, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. But being a real person and being authentic throughout those responses drives the best connections with customers and with any prospects that you may have on the phone. Now, when it comes to being grateful, there's a few phrases, common phrases that you should be using. Things like my pleasure. If any of you have been to Chick-fil-A, you probably know that they don't say no problem or happy to do that. Every single response to a thank you from a customer, when I get my Coke Zero refill, it's my pleasure. And the reason why you shouldn't use words like no problem is that infers there's a problem to begin with. And maybe there wasn't. Maybe the customer just called in with a quick question, not a problem. Answering no problem might then infer that you viewed it as a problem. So use phrases like my pleasure, happy to help, thank you for being our customer. Those go a long way in towards providing a pleasant customer experience when on the phone with your CSRs. And likewise, here are some of our top phrases to avoid. You want to avoid, again, phrases like no problem, let me look into that. When a CSR rep tells a customer, let me look into that, what they're really saying is, I don't know. I don't have the expertise to give you that answer. And that's certainly not what we want to convey. Maybe even being combative of, you misheard me, or putting blame on the customer, even if the customer or the homeowner did misunderstand them or didn't quite hear them 100%. Calling them out on that is never a good idea. So you misheard me, or maybe you misheard me. Let me repeat that. Things like that, also words to avoid. And can I call you back again? What that tells the customer is, I don't have the answers now. Can I call you back? The reason can I call you back or let me call you back is problematic. It's because that then gives the homeowner the time to go to your competitors. Whether they want to or not, they might start Googling around while they wait to hear back from you. But by the time your CSR calls them back, assuming they followed through on what they're going to do, you want to make sure you do everything you can to book that appointment or give the solution right on the first phone call, as opposed to needing to call someone back. So those are our top 5 best practices for the CSRs. Now, I want to share with you some client results from our Smart Selling program. So in our Smart Selling program, it involves one-on-one training directly with a Smart Selling coach here at Blue Corona, who is not only listening to your customer service reps' phone calls, but then meeting with them twice a month at a minimum to work with them and continually coach them. You know, we understand here at Blue Corona that you are busy a lot of the times and you might not have time for this, and maybe that's why your CSRs might be underperforming. So really through the ongoing coaching is where the biggest value comes into play. And the results I'm sharing here today, unfortunately, we do have to keep this client anonymous for privacy reasons. However, these results here are looking at a month-over-month comparison for 3 customer service reps from this company. Now, this company is a residential heating and air conditioning company in the mid-Atlantic of the United States, in the DMV area. And they initially gave our Smart Selling program a test run. They wanted to enroll 3 customer service reps to see the value that we bring to the table in training their reps. And what we found is that in month 1 versus month 2, so we have month 1's numbers starting here for customer service rep. In month 1, out of 25 total phone calls, the customer service rep booked 9 of those calls, or their close rate was at 39%. And after 1 month, with a higher volume of phone calls, that CSR's close rate jumped to 71%. And likewise, we see similar jumps and great improvements from these CSRs who really took our coaches' tips, advice, and training to heart and put it into motion. They practiced it. They revisited these. They role-played. And you can see the booking rates across the board increase into month 2. CSR rep number 2 increased their booking rates from 30% to 76%, again, with a higher volume of calls. And although customer service rep number 3, who was a new customer service rep to them, just recently hired, and this company wanted to set some best practices from the get-go, handled less volume of calls, but we still see, or less volume of calls compared to CSR rep number 1 and 2. However, we still see a significant increase in their own close rates as well. Well, folks, that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. Again, I want to thank you for being in attendance today. At this time, feel free, if you haven't already, to type in any questions that you may or may not have, and we'll do our best to answer them. So go ahead, take 30 seconds, type in those questions. And if you need to get out or have a meeting coming up, I just want to say thank you again for attending, and we look forward to speaking with you next month. All right, looks like we got a couple questions coming in here. So question number 1 says, how often would you recommend training CSRs? Here at Blue Corona, that's a good question. Obviously, the more often you can do it, repetition is key. You know, in the marketing world, we like to say that someone needs to hear a message 7 times. Think of it like baseball practice. If you change up your swing, or your softball practice, if you change up your swing, you need to practice that and commit it to memory so that the mechanics and your muscles are physically moving as they should consistently each and every time. And that's how we view customer service training. So we would recommend starting with it at a minimum, starting at twice per month, maybe bi-weekly, every other week, and then ramping it up from there if needed. What if there is really something that the CSR needs to look into? What's the best phrase then to tell a customer while the CSR is finding out that information? Another good question. So if there truly is something, the CSR, that's something really important to the customer that they need to look into, if it can be handled within, a couple minutes, my first recommendation would be to place the customer on a brief hold. Now, of course, with that, you always do run the risk of them hanging up the phone as well. But if it's something they can answer quickly, maybe by leaning over and asking another CSR, do that and then provide the solution. And I like to take it back to just being authentic and being empathetic with the customer. So again, reiterating that you understand what their problem is, and that in order to recommend the best solution, you need to speak with so-and-so. So again, thinking back to being that honest and transparent to build value, saying, you're experiencing this problem, your air conditioner won't turn on, you're not sure if you're a maintenance agreement member. Let me check with I'm going to check with the person who runs our maintenance agreement department or our maintenance department. I will call you back within 30 minutes. Again, one of those situations where unfortunately you're going to have to call that person back, even though it might not be the ideal scenario. All right, folks. Well, I appreciate everyone's time again today. That looks like all the questions that we have coming in. If you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email address is Brandon, BRANDON, at Blue Corona, blue like the color, Corona like the beer.com. Again, that's Brandon at bluecorona.com. And this webinar has been recorded and will also be placed on our website within the next day or two if you are interested in rewatching the webinar or sharing with your team on demand at a later date. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and let's go have a killer gym.